We all see our lives as stories, it seems to me, and I am convinced that psychologists and sociologists and historians and so on would find it useful to acknowledge that. If a person survives an ordinary span of 60 years or more, there is every chance that his or her life as a shapely story has ended, and that all that remains to be experienced is epilogue. Life is not over, but the story is. My first ancestor named Vonnegut arrived in Indianapolis slightly before the Civil War, 1855, perhaps, and he was a merchant. And he proposed to sell silk, and I believe everything he wore, except his shoes, was made of silk when he arrived in Indianapolis, showing how much he believed in this substance. But he soon started a general store selling shovels and pickaxes and rifles and all that. And when I was a child, there was this large hardware store in Indianapolis, the Vonnegut Hardware Company. I, in fact, worked there as an elevator operator and working in stockrooms and so forth when I was a boy. We talked about the branch of the family, the hardware branch, and we felt superior to it, as my grandfather had been an architect, was an architect. My father became his partner in architecture, and the Great Depression hit, and there was no business done in architecture as buildings stopped. And so my father, when I knew him, was a demoralized man, as there was no work for him to do. And he had every reason to be grumpy and melancholy, as there was no way for him to make a living. And so he was in a state of embarrassment when I knew him. And during the Depression, when people were looking for radical solutions to economic problems, it became a technocratic family. As they believed that scientists and engineers and mathematicians should run the world, that they were the only people with common sense.
This is automation, today's way of manufacturing. This is the challenge for today, to meet competition and rising costs by moving step by step towards automation, continuous automatic production.
General Electric found me when I was working in Chicago. I was a newspaper reporter there, and they got the idea of having real journalists working for them, writing newspaper stories about discoveries at General Electric. I had a family and wasn't making nearly enough money to support the family, so I started writing short stories on weekends, and there was an enormous magazine industry at that time which paid very high prices for stories, and they needed lots of them. A Saturday Evening Post published 5 a week, Collier's published 5 a week, Liberty published 5 a week, and they paid tons of money for them. And so I began that way, and I wrote one, and the Saturday Evening Post bought it and paid me 1/8 of what I was making at General Electric a year. And so I wrote another one, and they paid me more. And in a period of a few months, I had made more money than General Electric was prepared to pay me all year, as I had money piled up. I've never been this rich, as there was all this unused currency all over the house that would come by mail. And so that's how I began, and that opportunity doesn't exist now for American writers. The temptation of that big magazine money, too, was part of a learning machine. You are penalized immediately for any errors. And writing for the magazines, they told me an awful lot about how to tell a story. Because I would mail off a story and wait for the money to come, and the money wouldn't come. The story would come back instead, and they would tell me what was wrong with it. And they were right. Breakfast of Champions is a tale of a meeting of two lonesome, skinny, fairly old white men on a planet which was dying fast. One of them was a science fiction writer named Kilgore Trout. He was a nobody at the time, and he supposed his life was over. He was mistaken. He became one of the most beloved and respected human beings in history. I do know who invented Kilgore Trout. I did. I made him snaggle-toothed. I gave him the same legs the creator of the universe gave to my father when my father was a pitiful old man. They were pale white broomsticks. They were hairless. They were embossed fantastically with varicose veins.
Tell me about Kilgore. Where did he come from? Where did you invent him from?
I think psychologically, Kilgore Trout is what I thought I might become. Is when I say I noticed how poor science fiction writers were. I was one of them at the time, and I was as poor as any of them and as scared. One woman did a learned article on me. I do not know her, but she has a doctorate in literature, and she is a critic. And she said that Kilgore in the different books represents my psychological state in each of the books. And Kilgore really holds very different sorts of jobs and is described very differently from book to book, and I think that's right. He is a measure of how I felt.